And this one here is the case of the peripatetic moccasins, the moccasins that got around a little bit. And so this is a very fascinating story and one that has been uh, one of my goals, I guess you could say, of trying to actually understand these interesting moccasins. And so let's get started, shall we? So the first thing we have to think about are moccasins in general, and then asking questions about 19th century moccasins. Now, the thing that interests me about the 19th century and the potential of moccasins in the 19th century is this a time period that we know nothing about, basically, in the Western Abenaki area, from I guess you could say the Kennebec River Basin over in Maine, all the way over to Lake Champlain. I bet you there are probably maybe one or two publications that even begin to mention what the styles of the moccasins might be in this area. Even though we know what Penobscot moccasins from the Penobscot River, Passamaquoddy moccasins and Maliseet moccasins from easternmost Maine, and certainly there are lots of Mi'kmaq or Micmac moccasins in collections all over, actually all over the world. England has a very large collection of Mi'kmaq uh, beaded work, including moccasins. So this is about what you'll find if you go to an antique shop and you ask somebody, I'd like to buy a pair of 19th century moccasins. And so what you'll see here is what's called the Niagara style moccasin. Now, if you look at that vamp, which is the top of the moccasin, on the one that's underneath and a little bit over on the left, you see it's got this kind of surrealistic, almost abstract floral design on it. And these were made in huge numbers by the Haudenosaunee people or Iroquois people of New York and the Ontario Peninsula. And so these, I would say that probably in my experience over looking at these things in antique shops over the last 30 years, 95% of the moccasins that you'll find will be this style. Now, occasionally, okay, you'll see these. Now, these are Wabanaki moccasins, various types. We've got Penobscot, Maliseet, and Mi'kmaq. And they're, as you can read here, they're very rare. And I would estimate at maybe 100 Haudenosaunee moccasins for every one of these. And I have seen exactly 3 pair in my whole life for sale on eBay and Etsy, and I've got 2 of them. Okay. And so very, very, very uncommon. They're hard to recognize except for the Mi'kmaq one, the upper left quadrant there, because those have the very standard double scroll designs on them. But the other ones are very esoteric and hard to recognize. But what about Western Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont? What do those look like? Well, they probably would look a lot like the moccasins from the east, that last slide that we saw. But maybe even have a little bit of characteristics that might be more Haudenosaunee style, because it's right between these two traditions. So there might be some amalgamation or something like that in them. The only pair that we actually know about is a photograph taken about 1900 of a New Hampshire Abenaki family. And they're all completely outfitted in a, let's call it cut cloth fringe, man's and woman's outfit. And you can see these moccasins that they're wearing. And it's definitely a dark, probably a velvet vamp. And you can see that later. That's probably the leather. So it probably almost will look like one of those Haudenosaunee moccasins. But you notice there's a lot of velvet showing. And those Haudenosaunee moccasins don't show much velvet. The Haudenosaunee love to kind of fill up the space with their beadwork. They have a kind of what's called a horror vacui in the high echelons of art criticism. In other words, they can't stand to have any other velvet, so they just beat it all up. Whereas the examples of the more easterly varieties would show a bit more. So it looks like that may be a bit more Eastern looking. And for a long time, that was it. So the first thing we got to think about is what an Abenaki style actually looks like. And this begins many years ago. Oh my God, 20 years ago. All right. It didn't seem like that long ago until I just looked at the slide. And one of the places my wife Anna and I love to go when we go over to Maine is there's two big antique shops in Arundel, and Arundel Antique Village is a kind of middle line, not quite Beanie Baby level, but certainly not American Chippendale. So it's kind of is a blend of almost anything. So it's you never can actually completely ignore it, but you end up looking at a lot of junk to find. You have to, kiss a lot of frogs, I guess you could say, to get a prince in this endeavor. But nevertheless, you go in and you look around, and perhaps something is there. Fortuitous erratic. Now, an erratic is an anomalous object that lies well outside accepted scholarly canon. Okay. Erratics are oftentimes the key to a paradigm shift in the way that we look at the world. And this takes place in physics, in chemistry, genetics, archaeology, all of the uh, many of the important discoveries of the observational, not the theoretical sciences, is made by discovering something that doesn't fit. Okay. And this is an erratic. In 2004, this was on a shelf. And I remember exactly the shelf it was on. And it blew my mind. Okay, the first thing that you see is you'll notice it's kind of shaped like it's got a bit of a waist on it, about 1/3 of the way down. So it comes in and then it widens out, and then it has a slightly rounded bottom on it. Now, this is a style that's generally accepted as being a Wabanaki style. And it's very common on the inverted keyhole Maliseet style beaded bags of about the same period. But this one here isn't exactly like that. The shape is more angular, and the shape has a few other different distinct things, like those little loops of beadwork coming out the side. Those are much more Haudenosaunee-ish than Maliseet-ish. Okay. But the thing that really, excites me about it is the beadwork. And it doesn't look like anything that I have ever seen before. And so you can see I've got a quote over here from Frank Bergevin. He's a colleague I worked with for a few years, about a little over 10 years ago, trying to get this whole question of what this beadwork style looks like. And you can see that he said that it tends to look, seeing it as a Western Abenaki style, which was really undefined at the time. And he said it's closer to Mohawk in some or many ways. So it was really an anomaly. Nevertheless, I bought it. It wasn't cheap because it's in almost perfect shape, but it has some amazing elements on it. Now, once you kind of have this portal, or you've got this, this anomaly, erratic, that doesn't fit everything, you've got to try to study it, figure out what it is. You deconstruct it, find out what the little motifs, and the stylistic elements, blah, blah, all that kind of stuff that you get in introductory, art criticism and stuff like that. Um, so the next stage is to try to find more. So is this a single, alien object that landed on a flying saucer, and never will be repeated again? Or is it the tip of a very tiny little iceberg? Or is it the tip of a large iceberg? And so heritage hunting is once you understand the structure of the style, then you can implant it in your old brain and use it as a filtering mechanism. Go online to see if we can confirm it. And they're online. There's a very few of this style out, probably between 1 in 400 and 1 in 1,000 northeastern beaded pieces. And the more that you see, the more you get to understand them in more detail, and then you refine this, and then you begin to find kind of the edges, of it where it goes. And so now you can discover the nuances of its traditions. Stylistic, in other words, does the style grade into Eastern Wabanaki stuff, and does it grade into Haudenosaunee stuff? So these are, important questions. So these questions are geographic variability, and are they just part of a much larger tradition and some weird little variant? Where how does it fit? So that's what heritage hunting is. Okay, once you get this in, then you go expand out, and it's a mixture of going online and going to antique shops, and very rarely you will find them. But I probably missed hundreds of these things over the years before I knew what to look for. Now I've actually found quite a few. So this is some of the elements, okay, that if you're going to go out and look for this style, that you could think about. And the most important of these is number two. But we'll begin with this large sunflower with a very complexly beaded disc. Oh my God. It has braided beadwork, kind of lazy stitch, and very complex curvilinear, every bead sewn down kind of things. And it's an amazing sunflower, very distinctive. I've been able to purchase two pieces that have that, and I've seen four uh, in other collections. But the most important is number two, and that's a leaf. If you notice, oftentimes they're green, and it has the kind of ray, the veins of the leaf coming out at a 45-degree angle. It's got a space that represents the mid vein of the leaf. Now, radiating out from it, the rays, are these lines, and they're generally bicolor. They'll have a much longer interior side, and then they'll generally go white at the very tip. And then if you notice very closely on the slide on the far left, that you can see there's a little petiole coming out. It's often the petiole that engages other stuff in the design, okay? But if you see that, you've probably got about a 80% to 90% chance that you've got a one of these Western Abenaki-ish pieces. Another important element is a lobed quatrefoil that you can see is number three there. Now these are found in other Wabanaki traditions, especially the Maliseet flat bags, such as Rhonda Besaw does a lot of art in that particular style. And I don't know whether she incorporates any of the lobed quatrefoils on it, but much of her work is based on that Maliseet kind of centralish, more eastern Wabanaki. And so the lobed quatrefoil gets over that far into New Brunswick. It doesn't go over in Haudenosaunee territory, as far as I know at all. Then there's a beautiful double scroll at the bottom. But unlike the Mi'kmaq and other Wabanaki double scrolls that are basically single lines of generally white beads, this has a central line of scroll with a series of these bicolor um, lines or pinnae coming out. And so what we call this is pinnate, a pinnate or feather-like shaped double scroll. And so this is a lot more complex than than any other double scroll that I'm familiar with. And it almost looks like, a laurel wreath that you can put around an inscription in the middle of it. So it's a very classical looking design. So these are some of the elements. There's some other ones that are more minor. Now, I have two of these. This is just, remember when I was talking about distributions and things like that? This is a very Haudenosaunee-ish, okay, example of a reticle. This is like what we call an axe uh, style, an early Niagara uh, bag or reticle. And you'll notice it's got the very distinctive leaves that have the rays coming out of them up on the top. And you notice down at the bottom, you have that very distinct, instead of a double scroll, it's basically a pinnate um, kind of starting at the bottom and then going up. So a lot of these characteristics are very similar to Wabanaki, but you can see those brownish things there. Those are very distinctly Haudenosaunee abstract elements. Haudenosaunee leaves are generally bicolor, but you notice that the leaf kind of has the axis is cut of each individual leaf, and one side of it in the case of the one on the right, okay, the bottom right there, you'll notice that the arc at the bottom left tends to be darkish, and then the upper more right hand side tends to be lightish. Whereas Wabanaki ones will tend to either cut down the middle at a 90-degree angle to that. So these are very, very distinct. So here we've got a blended version. And you notice the main example is a leaf, that white one that's got clear with white on it. You'll notice that once again, it's got that Haudenosaunee kind of characteristic that you bisect it um, perpendicular to the axis of the leaf. So that's a Haudenosaunee leaf, but it's got the little radiant designs of the Western Abenaki design coming out of it. It's really fascinating. So I would guess, okay, that this is either Ganawagi or Akwesasne that had many, many Abenaki people in it. And what you had here was what we call syncretism, or the blending equally of true, strong traditions. There is a slight chance that all of these may be this strange Haudenosaunee-ish combination. The only definite evidence that we have against that is the quatrefoil, okay, that doesn't go into Haudenosaunee territory at all. So these are some of the important ideas that you've got to deal with when you're thinking about this. So this is just some of the concerns. Um, they were these very rare examples when you found them. They were always assigned by dealers and collectors or on the internet as Mohawk, uh, Ganawage, or the Wendots even. There's some that were labeled as Huron, and the Maliseets. Very obviously, the dealers and the museums that had these things didn't have a clue. Okay. Now, I didn't know where the bag was made or used, though it had a Upper Connecticut River provenance. In other words, it was found by a picker. Unfortunately, I don't know whether that was in a first level antique shop or whether it was picked right out of an old barn. But what we have there is that we've got it in the Vermont Abenaki tribal region there. So I didn't know what the heck to do with it. So I just sat on it for 6 years. And it was nice. It was pretty. And I didn't, I took it out and looked at it, scratch my head every now and then and put it back in the in the specimen box. And then uh, lightning struck, and it was one of these eureka moments, I guess, because I'd worked with Frank and I'd charted this, I'd plotted it out as much as I could, and it seemed to be from our neck of the woods over here in Vermont, or maybe Vermont, New Hampshire. But I didn't have real proof until uh, this brochure that the Vermont Historical Society made, and they wanted to include an example of Vermont Abenaki art because back in the 2014 to 2016, I did a lot of consulting with them when they redid the museum, and I donated a bunch of stuff, and I hounded them about being sure to include as much indigenous things. So they did, and they sent the brochure over to me, and I looked at this and I said, OMG, right? Now this has a perfect provenance. Now the idea of provenance is it's tracking something back to its original user. I don't think in beadwork we're ever going to get back to the original maker. But if we can track it back to the ethnicity or the region that the first user of it was, this really is a very important way of making an artistic argument. And this came out of Waterville, Vermont. Now, the late 19th century attribution was wrong, but there it was. Now, the interesting thing is all that was left were the vamps. Remember, I told you that a vamp is the top part of a moccasin. Okay. And oftentimes people will wear out the moccasin and then they just take the vamp off all the way around and save it, get another pair, pop it on. And so, sometimes these vamps can be put on and off until they're just shreds. Okay. And that it looks like these have been through the mill. So this has the radiant leaf on it, you'll notice. And it also, if you can barely see it, kind of faded or fuzzy in the upper right quadrant there, you can see you've got a Wabanaki quatrefoil. Now, this is the first time I'd ever really seen the Wabanaki quatrefoil united with uh, a radiant leaf. But this is really important. I'm hoping you can see the cursor. But in this, you'll notice that the leaves, you see they're coming, all the veins are coming down. There's no midrib in this. So they just join, they come down and stop here. And that makes the image where these come together, it fools the eye, and it'll actually look there like there is a midrib. And it's a very sophisticated kind of trick of the eye. I'm not going to say it in French because I never get it right. Kind of a design here. So you've got the leaf and you've got the quatrefoil. This puts it in Wabanaki territory. Okay. So what the heck did they look like? So we just got one part of them. Now a moccasin will have the vamp and it's got a cuff. Those are generally the two beaded parts on a standard Haudenosaunee, Wabanaki type of Eastern moccasin. Usually over in our neck of the woods, the vamps are huge. In other words, they basically are almost 85% of the top part of a moccasin. There are others like the Cree and the Ojibwe, people like that. They'll make them with a much smaller vamp, and they'll have a long center seam coming up. But interesting enough, I found one or two of these small vamp moccasins in not Abenaki territory, but in Wabanaki territory that have a good provenance of being used. So there might have those here too. So we can't completely discount that possibility of finding an Abenaki design on one of these small vamp moccasins. And of course, why should we care? Well, I don't know if you care, but I do. And so here we've got, perfect provenance. I mean, it was handed down in the family and donated to the Historical Society. So there wasn't any hanky-panky going on with one dealer trading to another, making up stories and all the things. I've been taken for a ride a few times by antique dealer stories, but this was gotten exactly in the shape that they are from the I think, granddaughter of Moses Wilbur. So, and the second paragraph here, Waterville is geographically basically the center of Frank Bergevin's predictions. Now, from his years and years and years of understanding Wabanaki and Haudenosaunee moccasins and other beadwork. Unfortunately, they're but suggestive fragments, but it does show that they were used a lot. So they were danced to oblivion. Okay, so these just weren't a pair of bedroom slippers. So how can we construct the original moccasins? So this is the next part of the adventure. So now we go to heritage hunting, and we have to be very focused now. So what we try to do is find analogous examples of whole or partial moccasins, either in the flesh or in the beadwork, or online, to try to recover the vocabulary of the whole set of moccasins, because this is gold. Now, this is, hard, direct historical evidence. And now what we need to do is reach out from that to see if we can figure out at least what the whole moccasin looked like, if not more. Okay, well, pretty soon another moccasin vamp was found to extend the vocabulary a little bit. Now you'll notice this one here is, I would bet it's a little bit earlier, because you notice it's beaded on red, and this is red trade cloth that generally we tend to think of as being fairly early and basically extinct in our area by 1850. Velvet and some of the other darker cloth that has naps and things like that could be, all the way through. But this was very definitely a trade cloth piece. And you'll notice that it's got the quatrefoil. Now, it's not exactly the same kind of quatrefoil. The colors are different. But you also notice that even though the quatrefoil still has the opposite side, same color, but if you look very carefully, there's this little line of a third color, kind of almost a pinkish flesh color that offsets each of them. So there's a little bit of a variance right there. But another important thing is if you look at those two round designs that's toward the toe, just a little bit. Okay, that coil is seen a lot of times on Maliseet examples of moccasins. And then if you look again at the very tip, you see those leaves that come out that are a single line of applique beadwork that makes a loop with a hollow. Very rarely, okay, and I would say I've only seen about 4 of these. You'll see that design on Mi'kmaq bags, generally dating to about 1800 to 1810. But then pulling it back to the west and pulling it back to Western Abenaki, you see all those other little lines that come out are 2-color lines. So the ones that are to the left there, you notice once again you've got these long lines, and one color is kind of a yellowish with a kind of light blue tip, and those very closely relate to both Haudenosaunee as well as these. What I'm talking about is a Western Abenaki style that we saw on that flat bag that I purchased in 2004. So this is really interesting. That's got Eastern and Western kind of tug and pulling on it. So now we have to get to authentication. So it's after you search, you've got to really start to authenticate something, you have to develop a research design uh, that will lead to a viable, in this case, stylistic conclusion. So this is some of the logic that we can use in this. So red trade cloth, we already talked about that. New Hampshire quatrefoil is identical in shape, but different in color from the Vermont moccasins. But number three, here's an example I'll show you of this is exactly the same quatrefoil with the clear beads and that kind of burgundy on a Eastern Wabanaki. These are often sold as Maliseet. They might be Passamaquoddy, might be Mi'kmaq too. I don't. Everybody has published about these, but I don't think the real science of the geography is done yet. So, but you notice they had to put this blue border around it. Okay, so it's always a little different, but this shows you that the quatrefoil goes over at least to New Brunswick, if not farther. So you got to get that down deep and dark. And so here I'm repeating bits and pieces of the analysis that I showed you and comparisons. Okay. In teaching, the best is to teach in triads. You tell them what you're going to tell them. You tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. And so this is part two of that. So after I talked about that moccasin, you see here's the examples of Maliseet and Mi'kmaq uh, material that relate back to it. And then what you do is you can work out this comparison. So it's really important to do geographic and stylistic comparison. And then you really get in the weeds, and that's why you got to put it on the scope. Because, for example, you see that Maliseet pen wiper detail there. Sometimes the Maliseets will make those circles entire circles. Okay, in other words, they bead a circle all the way around. Other times, they'll bead a spiral. Now, I think there's differences in where the circle changes over to a spiral, but I really haven't studied Maliseet, uh, this, I call it nested circle design. But you notice the one on the left here, the Norwood, is actually a spiral. Spirals are a lot easier to do than the nested circles. I've had a few years ago, I had my students at Johnson State College, now Vermont State University, actually test how difficult and time consuming it is. And to do a spiral takes about half the time as it does to be able to do a properly, nested series or circles. So the inference. So once you get this geographic comparison, uh, once you've got kind of type materials, you know what a Mi'kmaq thing looks like. You know what a Haudenosaunee thing, piece of beadwork looks like. Then you can do the comparison, and then you can make a geographic argument. And that's what our interest is here. Uh, so we have number two there. It's reminiscent of the Mi'kmaq and Maliseet design, but there's differences. And so it's found in the center of the Wabanaki area. And so the vamps are Wabanaki production. Basically because I have never seen that quatrefoil make it over. It might make it somewhere, sometime to Ganawage, maybe a ghost of a possibility at Akwesasne, because a lot of Abenakis lived in both of those places. But I would never, ever want to see it on a piece of Seneca or Tuscarora Haudenosaunee work from the 1840s. Okay, that would destroy my whole lecture. So so that maybe that would be a reason for people to go look, and the very fact you go look helps science along. So here's a pair of cuties. I found these on eBay. And as soon as I saw them, I said, "Oh my God, there are some beautiful children's moccasins done with a just a single radiant leaf on the vamp." The most interesting thing is though, is this has the collar or the cuff of the moccasins on with a distinctive zigzaggy design on it. Now that zigzag is found everywhere. You find that on Haudenosaunee moccasins. As a matter of fact, that first set of Haudenosaunee moccasins that I showed you, right at the beginning, those had zigzags on the cuffs. Or so that goes way over. Certainly, Mohawk may even make it over to the Niagara Peninsula or Western Pennsylvania, Western New York. But it certainly also goes way into Maliseet territory and even a bit into Mi'kmaq. So, that's a very, very wide spread design. So it's absolutely beautiful. So that even though they were found in London, which implies but doesn't prove that they were probably purchased in Canada. But the problem about them being a souvenir is almost all of the Canadian souvenir work that you find in the antiques trade in England, and trust me, I keep an eye on it, is in perfect condition. They were just brought by somebody that was rusticating in New Brunswick or Montreal or something like that. They bought a pair of them and they were brought back and put in their cabinet of curiosities that everybody had. And nobody ever used them. These things, the bottoms, if I turn them over completely, just about worn out, look at the bead damage and all the wear on these. These things, even though they're only 8.5, 9 inches long, they were worn out. So possibility is that this was given to the child of the family and they wore them out. And then they were hand-me-downs to the next generation and they were worn. But this is about, as much wear as you can see in something that's not ready to be thrown out. So I was very, very glad to intercept these. And thank goodness people didn't know what they were. And they were in such bad shape. I didn't have to pay a whole lot for them. But I was very glad to have them. Now, the thing is, the radiant leaf has some very slight differences in the shape of it from the pair of moccasins that we saw, from the Vermont Historical Society. So they're close, but no cigar. They're not from the same family, not from the same hand, not from the same tradition, but they're pretty close. Okay. And so this is a analysis of the child's moccasins. So heritage hunting, now that we have that basis, then we get these moccasins, put them under the scope, and then we can actually work out an analytic approach to it. And so that's basically what I'm saying. The overall shape and size, blah blah, it's consistent with both Wabanaki and Mohawk work. Once we've got that zigzag on them, you can go and look at zigzag moccasins that have the cuffs. And generally, everybody that publishes them as to date, especially the Haudenosaunee ones, these have been studied a lot more than any Wabanaki stuff has. Generally, they will put them around 1840 to 1860. So, that zigzag is an important way of being able to date it. They don't have a quatrefoil, obviously, because they're so small. So we don't really know whether they're Wabanaki. The poor condition, I mean, I guess we could exhibit them, but I always have to make that spiel that I just did about them being, just about completely worn out by children. So, they don't show any characteristics that deviate from Frank Bergevin's original prediction about the Western Abenaki attribution. The zigzags, are ambiguous, but everything else is okay. All right, lightning strikes again, and this was a more deadly lightning strike, I guess you could say. So, I was on online, and there's a fine art gallery. Oh my God, uh, up in Seattle, and I'm scared to death of fine art antique galleries because I have an interest in Southwestern, some varieties of kind of rare Southwestern and Northwestern Mexican Sierra Madre and stuff that I obsess about. And that the really good stuff always ends up into an antique shop that you have to dress in sport coat and a good set of trousers and a high quality bolo tie before you go into the galleries anywhere in New York, St. Louis, Albuquerque, Tucson, or Seattle. And so here's a pair. Mohawk beaded hide moccasin, 1870. Very fine work. $750. All right. This has caught me at a time when I have what's called an antique kitty. And at the time, I really didn't have a lot of money for purchasing Native American stuff because I was working with an organization that I donated all of my proceeds. You see, I don't make any money at all off of doing any consulting. I take all of the money that's given to me and either use it to purchase artifacts or donate it to Native societies because when I first came up here, Homer St. Francis took me into his office and he said, Wiseman, you're one of these damn anthropologists or scholar guys is going to come suck us dry, make a lot of money and go national on us and leave us in the dust. And I got kind of aggravated. Homer was an interesting character, and I stood up and I put my hands on the desk and say, I will never make a cent off the Abenakis. And I haven't. Actually, the other way, I guess you could say a little bit. So I was really trying to pump up another organization right now. And I can't take money out of the family finances for harebrained schemes like a pair of moccasins and stuff like that. So I looked at it and said, oh God, 5 years ago, oh, I would have been able to get these things. No, I said, I can't let them go because that's exactly, at least from what I can see, to be able to, they match exactly the pair from the Historical Society. But you see that little next to it, it says contact seller. So I contacted the seller and I went full bore, native scholar, archaeologist, anthropologist, museum, this, that, and the other thing. I told him, these are misattributed. He said, what do you mean? So I explained to him, he said, oh my gosh, would you be willing to to let me know a little bit more about this? I said, well, let's work up a deal. You want some education on Eastern? Because you can see up at the top. Okay, it's all Southwestern. It's mostly stuff that I deal with on the other side of my life. And he really didn't know Eastern styles a lot. And he said, this is probably a 1 in 1,000, which of course would make him want to pay more, me to pay more for it. But he became, we got going a little bit, kind of not exactly expert to expert, but I had something to offer him. So he knocked a few, not many, but a few dollars off. So I got him. Whew. I did have, I had a fairly good thing I was working on with the state of Vermont at the time. And I asked him if he could hold off just a little bit. Cash comes in, boom, cash goes out. And then they came. And oh my God, were they beautiful. They were in mint conditions. Okay, mint condition, stylistic match, same family, if not the same hands. Okay. Now, one of the things that you have to deal with when you're trying to actually get down to, let's say, Nampeo's work or Popovi Days versus Maria's work, in southwestern pottery. Each artist has what's called a hand, and the hand is um, has a whole bunch of very minor details about the way that the pottery is engraved or painted and things like that. And generally, you have to put it under a scope and do what's called a micro attribute analysis to be able to really nail it down because it's like a signature. Okay, somebody does hand um, autograph analysis and authentication. So, if you've got a J.R. Tolkien uh, signature on a letter or something like that, is it worth it? $5,000, or is it a fake at $1.50? So that's a lot of work. So this is really important, is to figure out these slight variation. Is it within the range of the hand of an artist? This is right at the edge. It's either the artist itself or the family. Okay. It gives us a complete vision of the Vermont used. Remember, we're not saying they're made here. We don't know, but we know that they were used in the 19th century and used almost worn out. Okay. And so the new set of moccasins established what we call a paradigm. The paradigm, once you authenticate it, and that's what I've just been talking about. You can set that up as as a model from which you can derive other stylistic elements, other historical elements, other cultural elements. Okay, it puts it up on a pedestal, but you got to have a really nice piece, and they're in perfect condition through the years. Um, and that symbol, if you will, in terms of the spirit of the stone language spirit in it, a symbol of Abenaki resilience, because now we've got it. Okay, boy do we, and here they are, looking at them from the side. Okay, so basically the variance between the radiant leaf vamp that we can see down here and the vamp up here is about 3% in terms of the spatial displacement of things. You'll notice that the color is choice on the one on the vamp from Waterville. It's one side is white and the other is orange. You'll notice the orange is on the inside and the white is on the outside. So the palette is exactly the same, but the bead placement, okay, is different. So these, the choice of your palette and things like this, these are all the ways you can compare them. But there they are. Now you turn them over, they've never been danced, nothing. I mean, they're absolutely gorgeous. One of the issues that we have to think about is attribution. Okay. Now, attribution is used in material culture studies, in art studies, in anthropology, and lots of different disciplines. So the idea of attribution is using some kind of analysis to be able to attribute or assign it either an artist or the school of. So maybe anybody that's interested in, American landscape painting knows the Hudson River School or the Boston School of Portraiture and stuff like that. So that would be kind of the broader form of attribution. The broadest would be, native. Then we could come down Wabanaki, and then we come down to school or artist. And then when you're getting down to that level, you got to start thinking about geography. Where could they be made? And so, we know that a New Hampshire Abenaki man uh, wore vamp and pucker moccasins with indistinct beadwork. Remember, that was that old photograph that I showed you, 15, 20 slides ago. Then in 2012, we had Frank talk about it being over in this neck of the woods. Quatrefoil, definitely Wabanaki, not Haudenosaunee. Wilbur moccasins, perfect Vermont provenance. So these are the elements that we can make an argument for these being local rather than being import. Now, this is a logical argument. This isn't a proof. Okay, this is an attribution. Somebody can come along and discover in 1840 somebody at Akwesasne made these moccasins, but that doesn't stop the fact that they all appear on this side of Lake Champlain. There's not a single one of these has been found in New York or any place to the west except Seattle. So the distribution of these materials, there's a signal in that as well. So now with all of these, we'll put it together to make the story. And this is the final, I guess you could say, output. One of the, and I'm not going to read this right now. So if you're looking at this on YouTube, this is the perfect time to just freeze frame, and look at it. Because you see these moccasins on this poster that I made on the left-hand side. Okay, these are put together with the pieces of beadwork that fit in that model. Now I have several other pieces as well now, so I can make a much bigger poster. But what you do is you put these moccasins, the fragments imply that pair of moccasins that relate back to the reticle, the child's moccasins, and even these other pieces I really haven't referred to. So what you end up with is what's called a narrative or a story. Okay. And so what the narrative of the story would be, putting it all together and making a case. Okay. A case for this being a Western Abenaki or American Abenaki, because we don't have any evidence of these things up in Canada. They all seem to, in terms of where they come out of, they're all from about, Androscoggin River over to Lake Champlain. And you notice only maybe one, maybe two of those are tourist items. Definitely the little pouch that's got the quatrefoil at the very bottom, that is definitely a tourist item. All the others are a good chance of being used by the indigenous people. In general, moccasins were not a big tourist item in the Northeast. These would be other types of beadwork. And if you look up on top, these are epaulets and cuffs that come off of chief's coats. Certainly not tourist items. Okay. So there's a good chance that these things didn't migrate too far, even though the two sets of moccasins, one ended up in England, the other in Seattle. But probably the reticle and the chief's coats, epaulets and cuffs probably didn't migrate too far. So that's what we can do, is we make up a story and put it in prose. And this is the type that will generate emotion on the part of a person reading it. Okay. And the goal of the science is done. Now it begins to turn into literature. And what we want to do is we want to show that there is an Abenaki presence in Vermont and this region here in the period 1800 to 1970, when scholars, they have neglected entirely that period, because scholars can only read, historians especially, okay, historians cannot go any farther than the literature goes. They don't have the tools, and their model is everything has to be cited. Well, the scientific method and these other technical analyses that we're using in the dark academy or dark academia model, this is basically the scientific method of hypothesis, and that's what we generated with Frank Bergevin, hypothesis of this region, that was based on a small sample, that original reticule bag. Then together, we developed a model of what we might expect. Okay. So scientists would call this test implication statements. And we tested it on a field of very, very, very rare objects, the most important of which was a set of moccasins. And then we did the attribution to work out the geographic region and the date. And from that, we generate the little story over on the right. And this just shows you that the adventure continues. And so I was online, of course, and I saw uh, this moccasin. So I was online and I saw this moccasin. Now, this freaked me out on about 8 different levels. Okay. So these things are amazing. They're a high top, and high top moccasins are exceedingly rare in the Wabanaki world and almost non existent in the Haudenosaunee. Now, interestingly enough, it has some variations here. One of the most amazing was these lines that go down through the middle of the quatrefoil and goes down through the middle of the radiant leaf. Those are just implied in all the other ones that I've seen. But a lot of the other things are exactly the same. It's got these little squiggles that come out that are bicolored, and you can see those emerging from the sides of the quatrefoil. And if you move over to the lower left image where you're looking at it from the side, you can see those little clusters of 4 white beads that almost look like little stars. You'll see those as well. But then you've got another little clinker that's thrown into it. Let's go up and look at the top one. If you see that reddish leaf that comes out of the sides of the quatrefoil, that almost has, once again, that Mi'kmaq leaf looking thing. And and the border is a mixture of the zigzags. And then you notice it's got these punctuated dots on it that you find generally a little bit to the east. So, this is fascinating. So, of course, I had to get it. Then I purchased it from a fellow scholar that I've known for years and years. And so when he sent it to me, he said, "Hi, Fred." Huh? So it was so funny, to find that this was purchased by another a fellow scholar that's got a good eye. But I know I probably will see him in a little bit, and I'd love to sit down and talk with him a little bit about this and how it fits and compares with the other examples. So it's a small world. I can't remember where this is. Someplace in the Midwest as I purchased it from. So I didn't have a clue that it was somebody that I knew. So it's very, very interesting. So trying to fit this in. Okay. So look at it. I purchased it in just a little while ago, 1/25/2024. And, this has got it expands the shape and styles of what we have without venturing into Mohawk stylistic territory at all. So this has got to be stuck over to the east of Lake Champlain. And, and we can list off the rest of these attributes right here. But the most fascinating, thing is the fact that they're high tops. And this is one of, I think, 3 known high top moccasins that are out in the literature at all. And to actually have, and unfortunately, it's not a pair, it's just one. But nevertheless, it stands in for the whole tradition. So now, not only do we have high top moccasins way, way to the west of Nova Scotia, and I think there's one Penobscot pair known, but generally they tend to be very eastern. But now we may have a high top moccasin over in this neck of the woods. And of course, at the bottom, more research needs to be done. So I think we've got an interesting puzzle that we have partially solved. I think we've got a very good case for this style at least being used in our neck of the woods. I think we've got a good chance of showing that this style, what may have been made here. Okay. We've at least established a school of beadwork, if not a individual family making the two sets of moccasins. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important for geeks like me, and hopefully that few percentage of you looking at this on YouTube that have made it all the way through to the end here, that maybe just finding something new and the way that one studies it, is an interesting exercise in itself. But what's the legacy of this? Well, the most important legacy is now we know what a pair of moccasins that were used by people in Vermont in the 1800s. And in terms of Abenaki revival and modern culture, all nations, okay, no matter where you are, whether it's Northwest Coast, the Seminoles, uh, Southwest, or Plains Indians, all style their regalia to the 1840 to 1870 period. All right. Therefore, to be parallel, okay, with all other nations, one of the ways as the Wabanaki Renaissance becomes more, how should I say, more sophisticated, that bead workers will be migrating from the Pan Indian designs they beaded 20 years ago to the Mi'kmaq and Passamaquoddy stuff that they beaded 5 years ago to this style, which has a good chance of being local. And perhaps in 30 years or so, uh, as time goes on, we understand what this paradigm is, and we can start finding more pieces. We'll have the color palette. Okay. So if you're going to do a Wilbur style Wabanaki quatrefoil, it's going to be clear beads and burgundy, and that's it. Okay. So you got your palette. You got your palette for your main motifs. You've got the palette for all of your auxiliary motifs. You've got the zigzag. You've got all the sizes of the beads. In general, we're looking at much larger than 13/0 down to, I mean, even 16. Some of this stuff is amazing, almost like dust. So it's hideously, sophisticated. And so, I have hopes that once we get this video published, and there will be, another booklet perhaps coming along down the pike that will establish this. So this puts a flag in the soil of a stylistically barren Vermont. And it has a flag of the Abenaki culture on it. And so the people that say there wasn't anything here in 1840, nope, here's a pair of moccasins, that my aunt made back in 2042. And it's made in this style that we know was from a couple centuries ago. And I think that is a dream that that we can have to become who we are. And so, we have to support our local culture. And with that, I'll say good night. Bye-bye.